Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I firmly believe there's place for the two. I think some people are app advocates. That's the way they want to access their whatever editorial platform it is. They'll always be like that. I think that's 100% fine, and therefore we've invested heavily in having a Joe.ie and a Her.ie app that have been number one in the app download charts in Ireland many times. So that's something we're very proud of. However, we recently rebuilt a site in HTML5, and that was an essential part of the business. How people access their content now is on lots of different devices, be it mobile, tablet, or even desktop. Here we're in an office at the moment where everyone still has a desktop computer, and they're still accessing information that way. Key thing why HTML5 is even why we still have to have mobile friendly sites and not just apps is because as long as people access through social media, they're going to hit the mobile version of the site. They're never going to hit the app. That's certainly not the way it is at the moment. So you couldn't just have an app and then have a desktop version of your site. You have to have a mobile optimized version. So essentially for us, it's kind of one site, be it HTML5, but also then have every app for every platform needed, and you're just giving people the options, and whatever way they want to consume it, that's totally fine with us. So for me, there's place for the two for the foreseeable future. For me, probably the biggest contributor to retaining readership is building a community online through social media channels. So that's the key thing. I think you can't rail against that. I don't think if Facebook and Twitter are now part of people's everyday lives, which they are, I don't feel people view Facebook and Twitter as websites. I think this is how they interact with people on a given day. 10 years ago, they walk down the street and pick up a phone. Now it's Facebook and Twitter. So rather than rail against that, build your community, accept that that's what they do, and make sure that you have a healthy community from there. So in terms of retention, you've got to have great content. So that's, thankfully, we're in a situation where we've got people that produce great content, but putting that then into Twitter streams, Facebook feeds, that's essential, and that's essentially how you retain people. Key thing there from that is if you've got a story that has a virality to it or a shareability to it, you'll get people in through Facebook or Twitter, and then what they'll do is they'll retweet the story or they'll share it onto their own wall, and then a story can go viral. So you can have a story that may have had 5,000 views organically by people on the site. It could turn into 45,000 views by getting people in through social media and then retweeting or sharing the link back onto their social media channels. That's the crucial thing. Nothing else matters when it comes to making a story big by social media. That's how it's done. And I think even the traditional media operators that have digital publications have to see it like that, because there's no other way. There's no way you don't fight against the tide. You get on it and you embrace it and you go with it. Firstly, I think the government have to do whatever it takes and have to try things. I mean, in anything, every idea has to be trialled, and I think it's welcoming. I'd welcome certainly that people come up with initiatives for employment to boost employment, and if they're trialled and if they're successful, if they're not, they're binned fairly quickly. With regards to JobBridge, I think that it has its place. We've utilised it. Both people that we've brought on were made full-time. It gave them a 9-month kind of training period that didn't cost us a huge amount, and they got to learn the ropes, and we were able to see their mettle in that period of time. So for me, it does work. I mean, obviously, there's been examples of where it's been exploited, which is obviously wrong. So there needs to be a lot of work done on the actual rollout and how it's implemented. So when it comes to education versus experience, I think I'd have no problem hiring people based on having good experience and not necessarily having the best third level qualification. I think it's down to the individual at the end of the day. A very strong cover letter is crucial. It's probably arguably the most important contact, because it's their first point of contact with you. And if you're bringing someone in the marketing or communications or business development world, how they communicate with people, if their cover letter is poor, if their application is poor, I don't care what's on their CV. If their application has been poor, then you kind of go, well, how are we going to get this point? Secondly, then in an interview, I mean, someone can go in with a relatively modest CV, but with a good cover letter and a good interview, and they come across well. Those to me are kind of more essential characteristics. So I wouldn't be as hung up on third level. I wouldn't necessarily be as hung up on experience. I think people can still get into places with. Some people develop aptitudes later in life, and if you don't develop it at 16, 17, 18, then you shouldn't be judged for the rest of your life on, oh, that person didn't do this, then you go to that college. I don't believe in that at all. I think that some people come into their stronger points in their 20s. So for me, I wouldn't be hung up overly on education. Having said that, you know, it's a very good barometer of how people are and how engaged they were in terms of their industry. But I think I'd say experience and the application itself probably form a stronger part.